it gives me great pleasure to invite on stage the CEO of Juvenescence, Dr. Richard Marshall. Dr. Richard, please take to the stage.
Hello.
Dr. Richard, you and I have been on stage a few times now, always wonderfully insightful. Before we launch into your TED Talk, this relationship, M42 and Juvenescence, it's got a wonderful journey.
It is. I mean, we've had fantastic discussions building a relationship with M42 over the last 18 months. And that's important because, you know, we're going out on a journey together, really bringing together all our expertise for an endeavor that is very complicated. So we've taken the time to really think through how we're going to move forward, how we're going to work together, and it's all culminated in the great news today.
Absolutely, and this is breaking news here on day 2 of Abu Dhabi Global Health Week. It's super exciting, isn't it?
It is. We are genuinely thrilled. I hope you can hear it in my voice. Very excited, and not just because it's great for our company and for our partnership, but it's also, I hope, going to be really great for patients because I'm a doctor and I work with doctors and scientists, and we're all motivated by the same thing. Ultimately, is we want to improve patient care, and you sense at this meeting and at this stand that we're on the cusp of something really quite revolutionary in that domain.
And you say that you are a doctor, but you're being far too modest there, Dr. Richard. Illustrious experience spanning over 2 decades, international insight. So we are really pleased to have you here on the stage. The stage is yours. I give it to you. Please, audience, give Dr. Richard Marshall a big warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So some of you will have probably heard me speak before, but I want to give you an insight into what our mission at Juvenescence is about, how we think that the new technologies, and particularly data-driven AI and machine learning, can help, and how we see this partnership with M42 being at the spearhead of, I really truly believe, a revolution in healthcare. So very briefly, I don't suspect many people here are not aware of the challenge we face in healthcare, and we call it the aging equation, which is a rapidly aging population. Unfortunately, those extra years often come with the burden of chronic disease, and unfortunately too many people succumb to those diseases. But when you add these two things together, unfortunately it means a huge increase in the burden on healthcare systems, and it's something that's going to be unsustainable. There is some good news, however. The science that's underpinning our understanding of why and how we age has come on dramatically over the last couple of decades. And what we've come to understand is that although there appear to be many diseases that we all unfortunately will succumb to at some point, they are underpinned by common mechanisms. And this is just one example, the so-called biological mechanisms of aging, the sort of cornerstone of that thesis. But the good news is that underlying this is the principle that aging is something that can be modified. It is not an inevitability. We are being damaged, unfortunately, all the time as human beings. Everything in our environment seems to want to do us harm, from ultraviolet radiation to the air we breathe to the bugs on our skin, and our body is constantly defending itself. But after many decades of that defense, unfortunately, we start to do ourselves harm, and we are no longer able to repair and replenish our tissues. And ultimately, we therefore succumb to illness. So what do we do about it? Well, let's just start with the basics. We do know already that there are many things that we can do in health and throughout our life to improve our chances of living a longer and healthier life. And it would be remiss of me to start talking about medicines before we talk about the simple principles, because they are well documented, and there are now really replicated multiple studies showing that these simple things, exercise, diet, good relationships, good family support, all of these things, good mental health, these all improve our chances of a long and healthy life. And so this is the Pareto principle. You get 80% of the benefit from 20% of the effort. So simple things first, and we must continue to pay attention to that. But a lot of this is about prevention, and that's also fundamental. Everybody knows that prevention is better than cure. They knew that 500 years ago. The question is, how do we get there? And the answer is, we can, but it's not an easy journey. what we want to do is reverse this statistic, which is the number of hospital visits per decade of life. And of course, they increase as you get older. But why isn't this the other way around? Why are we not seeing people in health and educating people to stay healthy rather than to stop being ill? So prevention, I said, not an easy journey. And one of the main reasons is that if you are going to intervene in health, you better be sure that what you're doing is safe and effective. So we talk about risk-benefit in medicines and in medicine. In other words, you must do far more good than you do harm. And so if you're a healthy person in your 30s or 40s, if you're going to take an intervention, a medicine, or you're going to do something, you need to be sure that that isn't going to do you any harm and it's only going to do you good. And that's a very high bar, because if you just look at the statistics across all of drugs and all of drug development, unfortunately, safety is a significant reason for failure. And you'll see here, I mean, statistics are at least 30% of drugs fail because of safety. And actually, many more fail before they even get to the clinic because of safety. So there's a high bar, but that's okay. It's a bar we need to meet. So let me tell you a little bit about Juvenescence, just a brief introduction. Myself, I'm obviously the CEO. My background is I'm a physician, scientist. I've worked in big pharma mostly for the last 20 years, having moved from academia. And I've been lucky enough to see a number of drugs across the line, but I'm also accompanied by incredible founders. Jim Millen, who's sitting here today, a business entrepreneur who's really led in this space, founding Juvenescence in 2017, when I think longevity Healthspan was in its infancy as a concept, and now everybody's talking about it. So, Jim's led a company that's been at the bleeding edge of this space, along with Greg and Dec, also incredible physicians and biotech entrepreneurs. I have a great team, some of whom are here today, and we're all celebrating the partnership announcement. And you can't move or talk these days without talking about AI, machine learning, and I'm going to talk quite a bit more about that and what it really means to drug development and what it means to us and our relationship with M42. But we've been very fortunate to acquire a company called Rule of Five, who bring with them a suite of tools that apply artificial intelligence, machine learning, to all aspects of drug development. And our portfolio that Juvenescence has built over those last 8 years or so has really been to span interventions throughout the course of health and disease. So prevention for sure. And one way to intervene safely in health is through dietary supplementation. So we have a small part of what we do, but an important part is to develop really high quality, data-driven, clinically validated interventions for ingredients for supplementation. At the very far end of this spectrum, when your organs are failing and you're at the end stage of a disease, probably all that's left to do then is try to repair or regenerate the tissue. And so we have founded companies that are also pursuing that. And in the middle is pretty much everything else. And so we've built an ecosystem within Juvenescence of multiple ways to intervene. In terms of the therapeutics, the medicines, again, going back, and I'm a doctor, physician at heart, and unfortunately have been at the wrong end of poor safety outcomes with medicines before. So it's always, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but safety is always #1 priority. So we see developing medicines for prevention and for extending life and health span as a two-step process, because you have to understand the efficacy of the drug and the safety. So first, we target those core mechanisms of aging, and with M42, we hope to delve deeper to find new drug targets that we believe are common to many disease outcomes. We develop them initially as therapeutics. So we treat people who have existing disease. We learn about the efficacy of those medicines. We learn about the safety. But where we really want to go is here. We want to get to prevention. Now, people always say, well, to develop a preventative for health span longevity, don't you have to do a 40-year-long clinical trial? And the answer is no, of course you don't. Firstly, we've been doing this for many, many years, and I'll give you one example, which is cardiovascular disease, because many, many people in the world are taking drugs for their lipid profile, for their hypertension, to modify their blood coagulation in health, who have no symptoms, but we're giving them medicines because we know that it's going to have a significant impact on their risk of cardiovascular metabolic disease. So the precedent for doing this is there, and there are routes to getting medicines into this space that don't involve doing 40-year-long trials, I can assure you. Certainly you can work your way from treatments in disease to early disease to at-risk and then to prevention. And if you want one example that's probably come closest to doing this, it has to be the GLP-1s, the weight loss drugs. They started as a treatment for diabetes. People would like to put it in the tap water, but they're not going to quite get there yet. But they've certainly expanded their potential, and they're now being given to people with a wide variety of sort of risk profiles. So if you want an insight to how prevention and real health span modifying drugs could look like, I think that's a good example, so we can do it. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, but out of that ecosystem has now grown a pipeline, so we're in the clinic with a number of interventions, and I'm just going to mention 3 in passing, just to give you a flavor of why we're excited about the space. So in terms of something that could be, this program started out as a therapeutic, so as a medicine, so for prescription, but actually we see great potential for this as potentially a supplement or an ingredient. Again, a very long story short, I don't make up the names, but plasmalogens are a very significant part of all of us. So every cell in your body has a membrane around it, and these lipids, these plasmalogens, are somewhere between 20 and 50% of all the lipids around every cell in your body. Unfortunately, they decline with age. And I'm just showing one piece of data here, which is actually just looking at what happens if you have high or low levels of those plasmalogens. And what we find is that if you have low levels, you're at much, much higher risk of dementia. And we've done genetic work, and we've replicated it with a number of collaborators to show that actually there's really hard genetic evidence that if you don't have enough of these plasmalogens, you're at risk of dementia and cardiovascular disease. So what we're trying to do here as an intervention is kind of get you back to where you were when you were in your 4th decade. So your plasmalogen concentrations are maximal when you're about your mid-30s, and then they, unfortunately, like many things, decline with age. And all we want to do is just get those plasmalogens and keep them where they were. So we're not trying to do anything artificial, we just want to retain your normal physiology. So I think these types of interventions are things that you can imagine could be a very safe way to restore and maintain normal health and physiology. Something a little more traditional, so this is a medicine that's now in clinical development in phase 1. It's an oral inhibitor of an enzyme called PI1. This has been a really interesting target for pharmaceutical companies, and including myself, as I worked a lot in fibrotic disease, because this particular drug target has been implicated in scarring of tissues, which actually causes the majority of renal, liver failure, some heart failure, and some lung failure. So it's a very important mechanism. But actually, the thing that really excited us about this as a target for health span longevity are these data. And these are looking at survival curves in people from the Amish community in the United States, where a small proportion have a genetic variant that means they don't express as much of this enzyme. But the good news is that they are protected from many chronic diseases, and in fact, just that one variant alone accounts for a 10-year increase in lifespan, which is phenomenal. So there's the promise. The promise is if we could modify in the same way this PI1 enzyme and bring it down to that kind of same level of these people that are protected, you know, could we really extend life and protect against many chronic diseases? But in the meantime, we think we could have a great drug for treating really high unmet need fibrotic diseases. And then finally, something really high risk, high reward. I talked about regeneration, and Morphoceuticals is a very exciting company. I think there's a Nobel Prize here somewhere. And what they've discovered is that when tissues are trying to repair and regenerate, one of the ways that they organize themselves is that they communicate electrically, if you will, so through ions moving between the cells. And this pattern of electrical activity determines the outcome in terms of what tissue will be regenerated. So they've started by using modifiers of those ion channels on that electrical current to see if they could induce regeneration. And this is an incredible experiment where they've amputated the hind limb of a frog. They've applied a cocktail of ion channel modulators, and then they've regenerated the limb, and that's the muscle, the bone, the nerve, the skin. It has sensation and it has motor function. It's quite astonishing. And so they're now probing these data sets with AI to understand the precise mechanisms and the phasing of them to find new drug targets. And then similarly, this is a different approach using a cell therapy. This is for people with end-stage organ failure. In this case, it's liver failure, taking cells from donor livers and then putting them back into the lymph nodes around the gut. And astonishingly, in those lymph nodes, you regenerate the normal liver tissue architecture. And it has synthetic and metabolic function for those who know their liver function. And this could be a way of salvaging patients who are at the end stage of liver disease who either aren't suitable or can't get a transplant. But beyond this, the proof of principle, there's an opportunity to, of course, replace organs, for example, in endocrine failure, including type 1 diabetes down the line. So this is not just a proof of principle for liver disease, but for the whole approach. And this is in a phase 2 trial right now, and the first proportion of that trial has finished. But, so it's all good, right? Well, you know, life is complicated, and biological life is very complicated. So we know that genetics is an important part of disease, but actually, if you look at chronic diseases, most things that kill us, genetic variants themselves are actually a minor component, an important one, but a minor component of the disease. Estimates vary, but I'm going to put some numbers here just to kind of outline the enormity of the complexity of us. So if you look at the number of genetic variants, estimates 4 to 5 million genetic variants. But that's just the DNA. What we now know is that DNA is controlled by another layer called the epigenome, of which there are probably 5 million variants. And then there is the transcriptome, so the DNA is transcribed into RNA. Estimates 250,000. They generate proteins, they generate lipids, and we are more bug than we are cells. We are 38 trillion bugs, and we are 30 trillion cells. And then on top of that, that's just, if you imagine that just for one cell, and then imagine that we are 30 trillion cells. And then we have the exposome, all the things that we do to each ourselves and have done to us, all the food we eat, everything I talked about earlier. So the complexity of these interactions is vast. So not surprisingly, this is big data, and it needs a big data solution. And that's why everybody's excited about AI and ML. And the partnership with M42 and Juvenescence is going to bring, you know, our expertise in drug development and AI with incredible resources that M42 and the UAE have built, because you need to bring that big data together with really great AI, really great compute, but also with a mindset for drug development and an understanding that AI right now will solve some of these problems, but not all of the problems straight away. So bringing together the right aspects at the right time is important. If we talk about that biological complexity, that's what we need to sort out to really understand which drug targets to go after. So there's really immediate work we can do with the data we already have and the data that we can generate to help find the right drug targets. And then AI will also contribute to many other aspects of drug development. In particular, it will help us design drugs. But again, a note of caution. So everybody is probably aware of AlphaFold, incredible. And they've been able to predict how a protein is folded, its sort of tertiary and quaternary structure, just from the sequence. And that's great. And they've been looking at modeling how proteins interact. But if you think about how many things are buzzing around a cell, protein, lipid interactions are occurring probably in the billions every second in every cell in your body. So ultimately, again, modeling this is going to be very complicated, but still possible, and we'll be able to pick off pieces of those cellular activities to model. But that's what we've got to keep striving for. The thing that we'd really like to impact as well is the clinical trial space, which is Victorian in its delivery compared to what's happening in the laboratories. So let me just highlight on the Juvenescence side. I mean, it's not just us. This is a community effort across the world to find ways to predict how drugs will bind to their target, And this is our particular take on it, but there are many other approaches to this. And ultimately, and AlphaFold is saying it as well, we all need to come together as a community and share the tools and ideas, because it's still going to be hard even if we all work together. But the chances to take months and years off the development of a molecule and its design are there. And I talked about clinical trials, and I sort of talk about Schrödinger's drug, which is when we run a drug trial, we take a drug and we give it to patients, and the trial is, the drug is the cat and the box is the trial, if you can follow the metaphor. Don't worry if you can't. But basically, we walk away. We sort of start the trial and we walk away and we say, we'll come back in a year and we'll see whether the drug's worked or not. And that is insane, because we now have the opportunity, particularly with digital tech, to have in-stream data. So we should be learning every data point, every patient. We should be learning about what the drug's doing. Is it the right dose? Is it the right patient group? Is it working at all? For those of you who've worked in drug development, the number of times you get to the end of the trial, you look at the data and you think, we could have told this drug was going to work or fail months and months ago. And it's not just about speed, it's also about safety, because if we can avoid exposing patients to drugs unnecessarily, that's a good thing for drugs as well. So there must be more work we can do here. And let's have an AI looking at the data all the way through. So I'm going to finish just with some of the areas to sum up that I think that we and M42 and the community that's developing here in the UAE can pursue. Certainly AI-enabled drug development, and what that means is using big data to answer big questions, targets, the molecules, and ultimately clinical data. We do need medicines and new interventions, and we have some in our portfolio, but we'd really like to expand that. Precision medicine, again, is much talked about, but I think here and globally, it's becoming a reality, because we now have the ability to profile patients individually, get their big data, and apply that. But what you have to do is you have to validate that, and you need big data sets, longitudinal data, and prospective validation. It's boring, but it's true, to really understand whether a measurement we take today is truly predictive of a patient outcome tomorrow. But again, the tools are here. You just need the kind of infrastructure and ambition in UAE to make it happen. And finally, we're not alone, and we can never be alone. Drug development, drug discovery, and healthcare are based on an ecosystem, a community of expertise. I mean, I do think it is one of the most complicated things that humans do, developing medicines. I honestly believe that. I think it is easier to put people on Mars. In terms of just the complexity of the biology we're dealing with, how all those dots need to be joined up, and all the expertise required. So with that, thank you for your time. I hope that was inspiring, and take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Always inspiring, Dr. Richard. Audience, any burning questions for Dr. Richard before we release him for the day? On that note, what are you doing at the rest of Abu Dhabi Global Health Week? What does it entail for you and the Juvenescence team?
Well, I mean, firstly, as you might imagine, we're getting to work, because there's lots to be done. So, we're working already, and we have been obviously working to move this ambition forward. The conference is getting bigger and bigger, so it's taking longer and longer to get round and see all the great stuff, so I'll be doing that. And if I happen to step outside in the sunshine occasionally, I might do that as well.
Fantastic. Well, we certainly welcome you to enjoy the location as well as the event. Thank you so much. We do have a question, and there's a mic ready.
Hello. So phenomenal presentation, amazing ideas, bringing everything together. So I'm very fascinated being part of the student of research, running almost 125 clinical trials in US. My question to you is that, have you achieved any success? I think I missed a part in any of those areas, and where are different projects in the pipeline right now?
Yes. So we are still an early stage biotech, but we have 3 molecules in the clinic, and there'll be 3 more by the end of the year. So we're in phase 1, phase 2 with three different medicines, and then more coming.
Awesome. So We are becoming a global leader in clinical research. So anytime you need support, we can always partner.
I feel a deal coming on.
Okay, so
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yes.
As you can see, Dr. Richard is super approachable. We're going to probably ask you to take your questions directly off stage now. However, he is super approachable and around with us for a little while longer. Please give him a big round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Andy.
you, Dr.
Thank you.
Richard. Thank you.